Well, I've got the components here cleaned and ready for that back catch, so I'll just give that a wipe with a bit of molybdenum paste, I think. There's a bit of surface corrosion there, but it's very light. I don't think that'll cause a problem. Just pop that piece in place. And its cover plate. Which is held in with two very small screws. And the button and its spring. Well, the button is a bit of a bugger to screw into place, and the best tool for that is to use a pin vise. So I'll get that tightened up in the pin vise, fit the spring in place, and holding this catch down towards the base of the camera, which is the other flaming way, I can feed this in from the bottom and use the pin vise to do that screw up. So I've got my button back in place. That moves much smoother now. I'll just put a little smear of molybdenum paste on that hook there. On there, I'm going to give that edge of that door a wipe off too, because there's a bit of rubbish on there. That seems to clip into place smoothly now. That's good. Well, that's the button back in place, and I think I can put the leatherettes back on the body. I'll start with the back. That's always the easiest place to start. Alright, start with some adhesive. It's usually more of an act to get adhesive spread on a large piece than a small piece, because it's harder to judge exactly how much adhesive you need on there. Because the surface of the leatherette is very smooth, because it's been scraped back, and all the hollows that remain are filled with old adhesive for practical purposes, it means that the adhesive doesn't tend to soak in, it's tending to sit on the surface, and so you might not need as much adhesive. Just making sure I get that right to the edges. A little bit short at this end, I think. Let's put a little drop there, spread that about. It's important to get it right to the edges, particularly if the edges are edges that had previously been peeling off, because they tend to take a set. You do not want to lie flat against the camera body. I think that'll do. It's important too to get the leatherette the right way up, so that it says Retina when you look at it from the back. Got to get this centred up, tucked in it along the hinge line at this end. Doesn't want to go. Getting it pressed down firmly into the position on the back there so that it sits down neatly in the rails. That looks good. I'm just going to give that a quick wipe with a bit of naphtha around the edge of the body to remove excess adhesive that might have squeezed out. Likewise at the end. And I'm looking now for bumps. There was certainly a more pronounced bump at this point that seems to have stuck down nicely. There were a couple of others, they seem to be less prominent. The damaged piece of leatherettes at this corner, well, you can see the damage extends to the metal edge there too, so that certainly was drop damage that caused that. But the leatherette there is firmly on the back and it's stuck back into the corners well. I'm just pressing down here where those bumps were to see if they'll set down. And that's it, that's the leatherette back on the back. That looks very good to me. And I better do the pieces on the front now. And when you put the pieces on the front, it's important to note that this line that runs across here, this embossed line, goes towards the top of the camera, not the bottom. Occasionally you get the occasional camera where someone stuck them on the other way up. If you've got the leatherettes off the camera and you're not familiar with the camera, it would be very easy to put them the wrong way up because you'd have no point of reference. Making sure I've got good cover without excessive amounts of adhesive there. Making sure I've got this the right way round. Roll that into position. That should roll up against that plated edge there. Now here I'm keeping my distances equidistant, top and bottom, because the chrome body edges come up against the leatherette at that point. Here we've got a couple of pronounced bumps. See if they will sit down for me. And I'll just run around those body edges with a bit of naphtha to remove any squeezed out glue. That's just a thread from the edge of the leatherette there. Just trim that off with a scalpel. Where those bumps were on the front, one of them I can see a tiny crack down the centre of the bump, and that's where the corrosion from underneath had pushed the leatherette up to such an extent that it had burst the bubble, burst the blister. Right, let's do the other piece. These three pieces of leatherette on the camera back and either side of the front are not normally something you would need to remove or deal with unless there's an obvious problem. In an ideal situation there'd be no ice bumps, so there'd be no reason to have these pieces of leatherette off the camera. To make sure I get that leatherette pushed down firmly against the edge of the hinge. That's looking pretty good. I'll keep coming back to these bumps and pressing them down. I think that they probably will settle to some extent. They're not going to go away completely. That leatherette has really taken a set. The camera back by comparison looks great. I can't see any bumps on that at all. But these ones are a little bit more stubborn. It's certainly not bad, and certainly an improvement over what they were when I started. And more importantly, the leatherette is now stuck back firmly, because the problem with it previously was that it was not stuck back firmly. It was actually coming away at the edges. And what happens if you leave leatherettes on the camera that are coming away at the edges is inevitably the edges will get caught on things and peel away further or get torn off. Right, well, I'm quite happy with the state of that. That's the body shell back together clean, and that's ready now to have everything put back into the shell. Now my mechanical components are all away in the degreaser at the moment, and the degreaser is nothing fancy at all. It's just an old baked bean tin filled up with wax and grease remover, which is a product that painters use to prepare surfaces prior to painting, but it's very good for getting rid of old grease. Right, so far so good. The lens and shutter assembly. Let's see if that rear group will unscrew. It does. Let's have a quick look at the state of that. That looks pretty clean. The front group and bayonets, that's quite clean, except for a trademark fingerprint there, and I probably know something about that. Just take off the shims. In this case there's a paper shim and a metal shim. The shims were used to adjust the particular lens and shutter combination to the camera body so that the image would be at sharp focus at the film plane. That meant that the camera bodies could be assembled separately, that they could be complete with their rangefinders and things all in place and adjusted, and then you just fitted the lens and shutter and changed the number of shims in order to make sure it matched. Okay, so here there's a lock screw here that lock screw is covered in a daub of paint. I'm going to put some acetone on that to remove that paint. It's gross overkill to put paint on a screw in that position in order to lock it in position. That's if that's what it was done for. It may have been done for a different reason. It may be that the screw had been made such a mess of that it looked ugly and that the paint was disguised. But certainly you wouldn't need to put paint on a screw in that position to lock it in place. There was very little danger that it was going to go walking off of its own accord. I'm not even sure it could physically back out with the lens in position. Right, so I'll unscrew the retaining ring here. Now the retaining ring here has got a quite deep scratch just at this point and here and all along here, which tells me that somebody unscrewed that with a metal tool, probably most likely I would say it was the tip of a screwdriver. You can see I used a wooden toothpick instead, which is the preferred method. Right, let's begin. So I'll remove the front rings. Just checking the numbers on the number plate on the front of the lens mount and the lens to make sure they match. They do. That's not really as big a deal as some people would make out. But it's nice to have matching numbers. It means that everything's original, probably. Okay, the screw holding the retard gear train in place at this end was loose. Now what that means is that the retard gear train could float, and that would mean that your speeds would be inconsistent. Now you might remember that I said one of the problems with the shutter was that the speeds were inconsistent and there was a problem with the retard gear train. Well, this was the problem. The screw was loose, and so the retard gear train was not holding in any set position. So very likely there's no more serious problem with the retard gear train than that. I'll just take out the single screw that holds the self timer or delay action in place. Unhook the main spring and the main drive cam, and I'll look at the state of that spring while I'm here to see what it looks like in terms of strength, tension. That looks okay. It's not a stunning example, but it's certainly as good as they usually are at this late stage, and certainly no cause for alarm. Unhook that spring. Remove the screw at this end. Remove this screw. and the B lever and the B lever spring. Now I need my pliers. I've got to pull this spring forward so I can unhook it. Of course it always wants to pull that arm forward at the same time, so this is by putting a screwdriver through there I can stop that arm swinging across, which means that when I pull the spring forward it unhooks easily and doesn't just move with the arm and not unhook. We'll take that off. Now there's a tiny spring right here which is easily lost, so I held a toothpick over the centre so that it couldn't jump away while I unhooked it, and I've lifted that off. That's it for the front of the shutter, because now I need to get these screws out of the back. With the shutter on my all-purpose high-tech small piece of wood, I'll undo these 3 screws that hold the shutter case to the outer shutter case. And there's a small screw here that clamps the electrical contact for the flash sink. And I'll just undo that. That should slide off. And here we have, there's the gear, here's the curved rack that's driven from the gear on the front of the transfer shaft. Here's the pusher that takes the action from the rack around to the arm, the cocking arm on the shutter. At the back of the shutter, just checking the action of the diaphragm there, that's very stiff. That should move very smoothly. If it's stiff, it means it's likely to come uncoupled from the shutter settings, which means that you could end up with a surprise exposure problems. And in a second I'll have to get enthusiastic and find my good tweezers, because these ones are a little bit cumbersome to use. Yeah, that lever is very covered in oil. That would have been making that lever stiff to move. I'll check the aperture settings now. That actually moves quite smoothly, so the stiffness was coming from that oily surface, which is effectively just gluing that piece to the back of the shutter and resisting it being sheared by rotating the lever. We have 3 screws here at the back. These 3 screws hold the mechanism plate to the shutter case. So there we have the mechanism plate and the shutter case split. You can see probably quite clearly there. I'll get that in the light. Yeah, you can see quite clearly here all this oil that's seeped in from the back of the shutter, probably from the focus helical. That oil finds its way onto the shutter blades and just glues them together. The case is not much better, and the blades show some oil on the blades, so all this needs to come apart and be cleaned. The blade should be oil free. Oil is not a good thing in that position. All it does is glue things together. I've got to clean these components. Yeah, you can possibly see if I get that held right for the light. Yeah, you can. You can see the oily patch on here, and these blades are quite stained with oil, and all of that needs to be cleaned away. I'll just pop those screws to one side and the blades, and start here with the case. And basically all I've got to do is clean these components up with some naphtha on the cotton bud until they're all clean and oil free, and reassemble stuff.